Welcome back to my channel. I'd like to just carry on talking about empathy and autism. I'm due on a different note, I'm due my COVID jab tomorrow. A little bit anxious about that, but hopefully it should go fine. Try not to think about it too much. And just kind of, it will happen when it happens, sort of thing. Trying not to kind of think about it until it happens, as it were. Easier said than done at times. But yeah, that should take place tomorrow, all being good. So in this video, I just wanted to carry on talking about empathy and autism and my sort of views on the matter. Now, you might have noticed if you go on social media a lot, like places like Twitter, for example, that many people in the neurodiversity movement, at least online, will often say that autistic people empathise more with other autistic people. That there's some kind of special affiliation between autistic people, that autistic people are sort of bonded in a way that they aren't with non-autistics. And I think there was an academic called Damien Milton, who's autistic, but obviously one of the more high-functioning able autistics, who coined the term double empathy problem, which is this idea that non-autistics struggle to understand autistic people in the same way that autistic people struggle to understand non-autistics. And he says, I guess, it's a kind of he says this isn't to do so much with an autistic problem as a difficulty connecting with different neurotypes, and that within a neurotype, he says, you'll find more empathy within that neurotype because it's like a sort of shared culture. Now, I personally completely disagree with this. From my own personal experience as living with autism, I'd say this completely goes against the grain of my own experience as an autistic person. Because to me, the difficulty with empathy, the difficulty with theory of mind, and all those other areas I've been talking about, is something deeply embedded within me. It's a problem I have relating to other people, irrespective of whether or not those other people are autistic or not. In actual fact, in some ways also, saying that you share a neurotype doesn't really make sense either, because that implies that autism is one thing, and as I've been talking about in other videos, I don't think autism is one thing. I think it covers many different neurological differences in the brain, some more profound than others. I don't think autism's one condition. That just completely goes against sort of any common sense I have, really. I just don't buy into that. I don't think autism is one condition at all. So I find it hard to relate to other people, irrespective of whether or not they're autistic or not. In actual fact, in some senses, I actually find it harder, possibly, to interact with other autistics than I do with a so-called neurotypical person. Neurotypical in inverted commas, because that's also a problematic term, but we won't go into that now. For lieu of a better term, just say neurotypical, but obviously it's a problematic term. when I'm with a group of other autistic people, my social problems do not go away. I find it just as hard to empathise with them, just as hard to relate to them, as I do with any other person. It doesn't matter that they happen to share the same diagnosis as me. In actual fact, quite conversely in a sense, I actually find it possibly easier interacting with non-autistics, at least those who have very good social ability. And I think that's because those with social ability kind of fill in the gaps where I struggle. So they kind of support the social interaction. They make it less awkward. So where I have a problem, they kind of, because they've got good social skills, they can kind of fill in the gaps. They can ensure that if I don't know what to talk about, that the conversation still flows. They respond appropriately and fluidly. So there's less awkwardness there. Because any awkwardness comes from me, comes from my side, but because they've got good social ability, they kind of support that awkwardness and ensure that it doesn't turn into something very, very tense. Now, obviously, this doesn't happen with this doesn't happen with any old non-autistic person for obvious reasons. Otherwise, I went to a mainstream school. Most of the people around me were non-autistics, and I went through most of my school without any friends. So clearly, it's not the case necessarily. But I do find that non-autistics with very, very good social ability can kind of facilitate social interaction in a way that other non-autistics can't. When I'm in a way that other autistic people can't. When I'm with other autistic people, I often find it easier if there's a non-autistic facilitator helping things along, which can kind of smooth over any kind of awkwardnesses in the social situation. So clearly, being around other autistic people does not in any way improve my problems with empathy. So I completely disagree with Damien Milton. That is not my experience at all. But there are people on Twitter and other social media, autistic people, who do seem to say this is part of their experience, that they find it easier to empathise with other autistics. It's not my experience, and it makes me wonder whether this applies to a particular type of autistic person, whether the autistic people who say that maybe actually are less disabled in the first place. Maybe it applies more to those who only have a very minor difficulty in these areas, for whom maybe they find some kind of common ground with those similar to them. And maybe very similar to them are other very able, high-functioning autistics. And I often find, by the way, that a lot of the people in the neurodiversity movement are very able, high-functioning autistics. People like me, who are kind of a bit more disabled, obviously not as disabled as, say, someone who, of a family autistic person. Obviously there's a massive gulf between me and someone like that, but more disabled relative to like other people with Asperger's type autism. It's very hard to know what language to use these days now, ever since I got rid of Asperger's. It's very difficult to know how to explain it, since I don't want to trivialise the experiences of people who, the carers, or people who look after people who can't talk and have intellectual disabilities and things like that, but they have a completely different condition to me. I'm kind of saying I'm more disabled relative to people like, Damien Milton. Completely different. We're occupying a completely different universe here. I do feel that a lot of the people in the neurodiversity movement do seem to be very able and very, very high functioning, and I think that's part of the reason why they can talk about it as though it's not an innate difficulty. But obviously, I'd argue even for them it's actually an innate difficulty, but maybe because they are so mild, it's easier for them to talk more about it being to do with society, or due to double empathy and so on, as opposed to it being something more innate, because obviously when you are more severely impacted, it's impossible not to notice that it's basically very in yourself. The difficulties I have are within me, and they exist irrespective of who I'm with. Irrespective, I come up against this block, this real problem interacting with other people. It's not always immediately obvious to the other person, because I can talk so well, and at least initially maybe I can appear pretty normal in inverted commas, but there I feel it as this great kind of awkwardness and social disconnect, and it's incredibly difficult, and it means there's always this barrier between me and the other person, which can be very, very disabling. I cope best when I'm with, say, support workers or people who are kind of there to support me. I cope best when I'm with a very, very socially able neurotypical person who can facilitate the discourse. Then interactions can be less tense and can flow more, and I can sometimes briefly even forget the fact I'm disabled, but that's very rare. Most of the time when I'm with other people, unless I'm with these amazing individuals who are so supremely socially gifted, they can just kind of hold the interaction so that I feel less tension. And also maybe when I'm with them, I don't feel so awkward precisely because I don't feel the need to put on an act all the time, so I could be more myself, and maybe I could talk more about my interests. Of course, then my autism is more apparent because I'm not masking so much or whatever, but at least then I don't feel quite so awkward. But when I'm with most people, there is this sense of awkwardness there, and this means I just really struggle to make normal relationships. It's a real handicap. Okay, so I'm going to move over to video number 2 now to carry on talking about empathy. So moving over to video number 2.